The year is 1942. The Pacific Ocean, a vast canvas for the unfolding tragedy of global war, burns under a tropical moon. On November 13th, in the treacherous waters off Guadalcanal, a place soon to be grimly christened Iron Bottom Sound, Captain Tamichihara Hara of the Japanese destroyer Amatsukaze grips the bridge rail, his knuckles white, his gaze fixed on a nightmare. Searchlight beams cut through the humid darkness, revealing an inferno. American shells, a ceaseless, terrifying deluge, erupt around his ship not as aimed shots, but as a solid, impenetrable wall of steel and fire. It's like a volcano of destruction, he notes, but one that defies logic, defies any military doctrine he has ever known. In the hurried entries of his personal log that night, Hara scribbles words that would echo as a chilling prophecy. They are not aiming, they are simply filling the sky with metal. This wasn't just an observation of poor American marksmanship. It was the dawning, horrifying realization of a fundamental truth that would dictate the war's outcome long before most Japanese officers even understood its terrifying implications. In the span of just 35 seconds, a single American cruiser, the USS San Francisco, would unleash more 5-inch shells than some Japanese destroyers carried for entire missions. They weren't counting rounds, they were performing an act of industrial alchemy, turning night into artificial daylight, their gun barrels glowing an angry, continuous red from the sheer volume of continuous fire. Meanwhile, 2,700 miles away, in the relative tranquility of Pearl Harbor, ammunition ships were already being loaded for the next shipment. 15,000 tons of shells. Enough to replace everything the American fleet would expend in this savage battle 50 times over. A stark, brutal contrast to the grim reality in Tokyo, where naval planners meticulously calculated whether they could spare a mere 12 rounds per gun for the next critical convoy run. The mathematics of defeat, it seemed, were being scrawled not in strategic maps or tactical maneuvers, but in brass casings and cordite, in production statistics that openly mocked every assumption the Imperial Japanese Navy had ever made about facing the United States in a prolonged industrial conflict. Captain Hara, a man of remarkable resilience, would survive the war, becoming the only Japanese destroyer commander to fight from the attack on Pearl Harbor to the final surrender. He would bear witness to a transformation, not just of naval warfare, but of the entire worldview of the Imperial Japanese Navy. That awakening, though few recognized its true significance at the time, had begun 6 months earlier. On May 7, 1942, during the tumultuous Battle of the Coral Sea, Commander Teiichi Nito, the executive officer of the carrier Shokaku, observed something that profoundly perplexed him. American cruisers and destroyers maintained anti-aircraft fire for 4 continuous hours, never seeming to pause, never conserving ammunition. Each American destroyer, he would later testify to Allied interrogators, appeared to carry more anti-aircraft ammunition than our entire destroyer division combined. The observation seemed utterly impossible, a violation of every military principle. Japanese doctrine, meticulously refined over decades, assumed that all naval powers faced similar inherent ammunition constraints. Their own Type 96 25mm anti-aircraft gun, Japan's standard light AA weapon, came with strict, non-negotiable firing protocols. Gunners were ordered to hold fire until enemy aircraft reached a mere 800 meters, a hair-raisingly close range for planes screaming in at over 300 miles per hour. They were permitted to fire only short bursts of 3 to 5 rounds, and commanded to cease fire immediately once the target passed optimal range. This wasn't because it was the most tactically sound approach, or because it maximized hit probability. It was simply because Japan's meager ammunition reserves couldn't possibly support any other strategy. Lieutenant Commander Masatake Okumiya, aboard the carrier Ryujo, had relentlessly drilled his gunners on these precise principles. Every man knew that their ship's magazines held enough ammunition for exactly 12 minutes of sustained anti-aircraft fire. After that, they would be utterly defenseless. The Americans, he observed with growing unease, seemed to fire continuously for hours on end, without a second thought. But the full, horrifying implications of this disparity wouldn't truly become clear until Guadalcanal, where the cold, hard mathematics of industrial warfare would be etched in blood and steel across the very waters the Americans would so aptly name Iron Bottom Sound. Let's rewind further to February 27, 1942, the Battle of the Java Sea. Tactically, it was a resounding Japanese triumph, but Captain Hara, still commanding Amatsukaze, witnessed something that disturbed him far more than any enemy gunfire. The combined American, British, Dutch, and Australian force, under Rear Admiral Carroll Dorman, fired an astonishing 1,619 rounds of 8-inch shells during the battle, achieving only 5 hits, with 4 of those proving to be duds. The Japanese, by contrast, fired far less but scored critical, devastating hits. Yet, what troubled Hara, and what he noted in his after-action report, was the relentless, seemingly unending barrage from the Allied ships. They never stopped firing, never seemed concerned about ammunition expenditure, maintaining rates of fire that would have utterly exhausted Japanese magazines in the first hour of combat. They fired as if they had unlimited shells, Hara would write in his memoir, published decades later. Poor gunnery, yes, but such wealth of ammunition that accuracy became secondary to volume. The Japanese victory was complete. 2 Allied cruisers and 3 destroyers sunk. But in the wardroom afterward, Hara overheard a disturbing conversation, one that gnawed at him. Lieutenant Yoshida, his gunnery officer, was calculating ammunition expenditure. "Captain, we used 40% of our main battery ammunition. If the battle had continued another 2 hours..." Hara silenced him with a look, but the arithmetic was clear, stark, and terrifying. The Amatsukaze had started the battle with 2,000 rounds of 5-inch ammunition. In one engagement, they had expended 800. The destroyed Allied cruiser, HMS Exeter, according to survivors they had rescued, had fired over 1,500 rounds from her 8-inch guns alone. That was more than most Japanese heavy cruisers carried in total. The sheer, bottomless pit of Allied resources was beginning to reveal itself. August 7, 1942. When the Americans landed on Guadalcanal, the Imperial Navy's immediate response laid to bear the escalating ammunition crisis in stark, undeniable terms. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's striking force, racing south from Rabaul, carried enough ammunition for exactly one night battle. This wasn't a tactical choice born of strategic brilliance. It was a grim necessity, for that was literally all that existed in Rabaul's magazines. The Battle of Savo Island on August 9th, where Mikawa's force sank 4 Allied heavy cruisers in a mere 33 minutes, killing 1,077 sailors with no Japanese losses, seemed to vindicate Japanese tactics of precision and surprise. It was hailed as a tactical masterpiece. But hidden within this dazzling victory was the seed of strategic catastrophe. Commander Toshikazu Omai, Mikawa's operations officer, would later confess to American interrogators. We withdrew immediately after the battle, not from fear of air attack as you believed, but because we had exhausted most of our ammunition. We had nothing left for a second engagement. The American transports crammed with troops and supplies, sitting defenseless just miles away, were spared. Not by choice, not by strategy, but because the Japanese literally couldn't afford to shoot at them. Japanese forces had fired 471 rounds total, achieving 10 hits, a 2.1% hit rate that, despite the devastating outcome, would later be criticized as wasteful by Tokyo. The idea of firing more was simply anathema, unimaginable. Meanwhile, at Pearl Harbor, Captain William Poco Smith oversaw the loading of the ammunition ship USS Reindeer. Her cargo manifest for this single voyage was staggering: 5,000 tons of naval ammunition, including 350,000 rounds of 5-inch shells, 1.2 million rounds of 40 mm, and 3 million rounds of 20 mm. This single shipment represented more ammunition than the entire Japanese combined fleet would expend in the next 3 months. The scale of this logistical behemoth was simply beyond Japan's comprehension. The infamous Tokyo Express runs, high-speed destroyer missions to resupply the starving Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal, would reveal the ammunition crisis in pathetic, soul-crushing detail. On November 30th, 1942, Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka led 8 destroyers on another desperate supply mission. The cargo manifest, later discovered in captured documents, told a story of utter desperation. Rice, 100 drums, medical supplies, 200 drums, and ammunition, a paltry 280 drums. For 15,000 desperate, disease-ridden soldiers, less than 300 drums of ammunition. Each drum contained roughly 300 rifle rounds or an equivalent weight in other munitions. The entire Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal, fighting for its very survival, was subsisting on ammunition deliveries that a single American destroyer could expend in 20 minutes of intense combat. Captain Hara, commanding Amatsukaze, on these perilous runs, wrote bitterly in his log, "We risk 8 destroyers, dozens of lives, tons of precious fuel to deliver what the Americans probably waste in target practice." He was more right than he knew, and the irony was a knife to the heart of Japanese pride. That very same day, the American destroyer USS Fletcher conducted a routine gunnery exercise, expending 127 rounds of 5-inch ammunition, roughly equivalent to half a drum, from Tanaka's precious hard-won cargo. The numbers were not just staggering. They were incomprehensible to Japanese planners who had calculated the course of the war based on their own limited production capabilities. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of industrial mobilization on a scale America could achieve. The true Goliath of American production was not just visible in naval shipments, but in sprawling, purpose-built complexes. Consider the Naval Ammunition Depot Hastings, Nebraska, which only came online in March 1943. Built on 48,000 acres of prairie, encompassing 2,200 buildings and 207 miles of railroad track, it employed 10,000 workers at its peak. This single inland facility, far from any coastline, produced 40% of the entire U.S. Navy's ammunition during the war. In its very first month of operation, Hastings alone produced more naval ammunition than all Japanese facilities combined would produce for the remainder of 1943. The mind struggles to grasp such a scale. The facility specialized in the 5-inch .38 caliber ammunition, the versatile backbone of American naval firepower. Its production rate started at 100,000 rounds per month, climbing relentlessly to 300,000 rounds per month by September 1943. Each round was inspected, tested, and shipped with a quality control process so stringent that it rejected more ammunition than Japanese factories produced in total. Simultaneously, the Naval Ammunition Depot McAllister, Oklahoma, opened its gates. Its focus was on larger caliber shells and aerial bombs. By December 1943, McAllister's monthly production included 50,000 6-inch shells, 12,000 8-inch shells, 2,000 16-inch shells, plus an astounding 500,000 pounds of aerial ordnance. Its peak workforce, reached in 1945, numbered 8,600. These were not just factories. They were industrial cities, monuments to a nation's capacity for total war. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Kure Naval Arsenal, the nation's premier ammunition facility, struggled valiantly to produce 10,000 shells of all calibers monthly. The Toyokawa Naval Arsenal, expanded at enormous cost in 1940, achieved a peak production of 35,000 machine guns and 4.5 million rounds of small arms ammunition monthly. This was achieved, however, only by employing a staggering 56,400 workers, including 6,000 conscripted schoolchildren aged 12 to 16, laboring in dangerous, often lethal conditions. The contrast was not merely quantitative, it was qualitative, a chasm between two fundamentally different approaches to industrialization and human capital. One nation poured its wealth into machines and skilled labor. The other poured its very youth into a losing battle. June 19, 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea would provide the most dramatic, and for Japan, most tragic demonstration of this ammunition disparity in the entire war. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa had assembled 9 carriers with 473 aircraft for what Japan desperately hoped would be the decisive battle, the Eigo operation. His opposite, Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanded 15 carriers with 956 aircraft. But more importantly, Spruance's Task Force 58 carried something Ozawa couldn't even begin to imagine. Virtually unlimited ammunition. Lieutenant Sadamu Takahashi, flying a Zero fighter from the carrier Taiho, survived being shot down and later vividly described his approach to the American fleet. The sky turned black with explosions, he recounted. Not aimed shots, a solid wall of fire. They weren't trying to hit us specifically. They were filling every cubic meter of air with steel. The Americans fired with a mechanical precision born of endless supply and rigorous training. Every 5-inch gun maintained 15 rounds per minute. Every 40-meter Bofors mount pumped out 120 rounds per minute. The 20mm Oerlikon cannons sprayed 450 rounds per minute. The destroyer USS Ace C.S. Stockham alone, a single ship, fired 12,000 rounds of 40 and 22 rounds of 20 ammunition in 6 hours of combat. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's top ace, observed from his Hellcat fighter, "The Japs flew into a curtain of fire. Our ships weren't aiming at individual planes. They were creating zones of death that nothing could fly through." The mathematics were relentless, unforgiving. Japanese aircraft losses totaled 476, including those lost when their carriers sank. American aircraft losses, a mere 29. The ammunition expended by the Americans was staggering: 200,000 rounds of 5-inch, 500,000 rounds of 40 mm, 1.2 million rounds of 20 mm. Of the Japanese pilots shot down, only 59 were rescued, many of whom recounted tales of sheer disbelief. "It was not battle," one pilot reportedly said. "It was execution by machinery." the nickname given to the engagement by American pilots, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, speaks volumes about the one-sided nature of the aerial slaughter. October 25, 1944, 06:58 hours off Samar Island, Philippines. The true David versus Goliath battle that would epitomize the ammunition war was about to begin. Admiral Takeo Kuroda's center force, comprising 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers, had achieved complete tactical surprise against Taffy 3, a small American escort carrier group. 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. What happened next defied every expectation, every strategic calculation. Commander Ernest Evans, commanding the destroyer USS Johnston, didn't hesitate. All hands to general quarters. Prepare to attack major Japanese fleet units. All engines ahead flank. Left full rudder. In the next hour, Johnston would fire over 200 rounds from her 5 5-inch guns at the heavy cruiser, Kumano, scoring 40 hits that wrecked her superstructure. Johnston then engaged the battleship Congo, firing 30 rounds while making smoke. Her gunners weren't aiming carefully, meticulously. They were simply pouring fire at maximum possible rate, leveraging their seemingly bottomless magazines. Meanwhile, on the destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland made a fateful, heroic decision. "We're going in, boys," he told his crew. "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected." What Copeland didn't say, perhaps couldn't bring himself to, was that his ship carried only 325 rounds per gun, a total of 625 rounds for its entire main battery. In the next 35 minutes, the Roberts would fire over 600 rounds from just one gun mount, nearly 40% of her entire magazine, at rates that caused her gun barrels to glow white-hot. Paul H. Carr, a gunner's mate, 3rd class, and gun captain of Mount 52, maintained firing even after the mount lost power. He and his crew manually loaded and fired 6 more rounds before a catastrophic explosion. Carr was found dying, still clutching the last 5-inch shell, desperately trying to load it into the destroyed gun. This wasn't just bravery. It was a testament to the fact that even in suicidal acts of valor, the weapon that mattered most was the round itself. On the Japanese side, the battleship Yamato, the most powerful warship ever built, fired her massive main guns in anger for the first, and only time against surface targets. While the exact number of rounds cannot be definitively confirmed, she fired dozens of her enormous 18.1-inch shells. But her magazines contained armor-piercing shells, meticulously designed for battleship-to-battleship combat. Against thin-skinned escort carriers, these colossal shells passed through without exploding, causing minimal damage. Admiral Matome Ugaki, commanding Battleship Division 1, wrote in his diary that night, a mix of awe and despair in his words. The enemy destroyers charged through their own smoke, firing continuously. Such expenditure of ammunition for such small ships, it defies calculation. The battle statistics tell a chilling story of resource disparity. American ammunition expended, approximately 20,000 rounds of all calibers. Japanese ammunition expended, approximately 3,000 rounds of all calibers. American ships lost: 2 destroyers, 1 destroyer escort, 1 escort carrier. Japanese ships damaged by gunfire: 3 heavy cruisers severely damaged. The result? A Japanese withdrawal despite overwhelming superiority in heavy firepower. The American audacity, fueled by their seemingly endless supply of projectiles, turned a guaranteed Japanese victory into a strategic retreat. By late 1944, American ammunition production had reached levels that simply defied Japanese comprehension, a scale of industrial might that was fundamentally alien to their economic and strategic planning. The true scope was staggering. The United States produced 47 billion rounds of small arms ammunition between 1941 and 1945, with 41.4 billion being rifle and pistol ammunition specifically. This was enough, as one general grimly noted, for 10 shots at every person alive on Earth. Monthly production figures for November 1944 alone paint a picture of industrial omnipotence. United States small arms ammunition, 3.5 billion rounds, 5-inch shells, 1.2 million rounds, 40mm rounds, 8 million rounds, 20mm rounds, 20 million rounds, 16-inch shells, 10,000 rounds, 14-inch shells, 15,000 rounds, 8-inch shells, 40,000 rounds, 6-inch shells, 60,000 rounds. By contrast, Japan's entire war production of all ammunition combined was approximately 15 million rounds. The Crane Naval Ammunition Depot in Indiana alone, one of many, covered 63,000 acres and employed 10,000 workers. Its storage capacity included 2,000 individual magazines, holding 400,000 tons of ammunition. To put this in stark perspective, the entire Imperial Japanese Navy's ammunition reserves in December 1941, on the eve of Pearl Harbor, totaled approximately 200,000 tons. One American depot could store twice what Japan possessed at the start of the war. The human dimension of this industrial chasm was equally telling. At Hastings, Nebraska, workers lived in specially built dormitories, ate in cafeterias serving 15,000 meals daily, and enjoyed recreational facilities, including bowling alleys and movie theaters. Their children attended schools built specifically for the facility. It was a self-contained city, a meticulously organized community dedicated to producing the instruments of destruction, but doing so with a standard of living that reflected America's wealth and respect for its workforce. Contrast this with Toyokawa Naval Arsenal, where 12-year-old Akiko Sato worked 12-hour shifts filling shell casings. In her post-war memoir, she wrote, "We were always hungry. They gave us one rice ball for lunch. We worked until we collapsed. Many of my schoolmates died in accidents." She then added the most heart-wrenching comparison. "We produced maybe 100 shells daily in our section. The Americans probably fired that many in 1 second. This wasn't hyperbole. It was the grim, unvarnished truth of a child witnessing the industrial disparity firsthand. The ammunition shortage created a vicious cycle that accelerated Japan's defeat, a spiral of ever-worsening circumstances. Training suffered catastrophically when every single round had to be hoarded for actual combat. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading surviving ace, revealed the devastating impact on pilot quality. New pilots in 1944 received 40 to 60 hours flight training. In 1941, we had 700 hours minimum, he explained. But worse was gunnery training. New pilots fired maybe 100 rounds in practice. Americans fired thousands. The contrast in training was stark, almost unbelievable. At Naval Air Station Pensacola, American pilots fired an average of 5,000 rounds during advanced fighter training. Practice ammunition was literally unlimited. Trainees who showed poor marksmanship simply fired more, endlessly, until they improved. American pilots maintained 400 to 525 hours of flight training throughout the war, arriving in combat theaters with confidence and honed skills. Ensign Koshiro Aito, trained in late 1944, described his own meager preparation. "I fired my guns exactly 3 times before combat, 10 rounds each time, 30 rounds total." He recalled his first combat mission. The American I faced probably fired 30 rounds in the first second. For anti-aircraft gunners, the situation was even more desperate. Japanese doctrine explicitly required holding fire until enemy aircraft were within 800 meters. Point-blank range for planes traveling at 300 miles per hour or more. Why such a dangerous, last-ditch approach? Because at longer ranges, hit probability dropped below 0.5%, making ammunition expenditure economically wasteful for a nation that could ill afford it. American gunners, by contrast, trained differently, with an abundance that fostered a different kind of instinct. Seaman First Class Robert Scott, a 20-millimeter gunner on USS New Jersey, recalled, "We fired at everything. Sleeves towed by planes, balloons, floating targets. I probably fired 50,000 rounds in training." He then added, "The first time I saw a Japanese plane, muscle memory took over. I didn't think about ammunition. I just filled the sky with lead where he needed to fly." This wasn't just about volume. It was about instilling a mindset of overwhelming force, removing the hesitation that scarcity creates. Task Force 38's logistics train represented a revolution in naval warfare that Japanese planners never anticipated, could not comprehend. Service Squadron 10, the fleet's mobile supply force, was a floating city of support. It included 34 fleet oilers, 11 escort carriers for replacement aircraft, 19 ammunition ships, 16 refrigerated stores ships, 8 hospital ships, 12 fleet tugs, and 29 destroyer escorts for protection. On July 21st to 22nd, 1945, Task Group 38 conducted what was described as probably the largest single replenishment at sea operation in history, delivering 6,369 tons of ammunition, 379,157 barrels of fuel oil, 1,635 tons of provisions, 98 replacement aircraft, and 421 personnel. This single replenishment delivered more ammunition than most Japanese naval bases held in their total inventory. Commander Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, admitted after the war with a poignant honesty, "We calculated American consumption based on our own limitations. If we could afford 1,000 rounds for an operation, we assumed they might have 3,000. The reality, that they had 100,000, was beyond imagination." This wasn't a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of imagination, a cognitive bias rooted in their own industrial limitations. April 6, 1945. Operation Tengo, the desperate, suicidal sortie of the battleship Yamato, provided the war's most poignant and tragic demonstration of this ammunition disparity. Yamato sailed with 170 rounds for her 9 18.1-inch guns, 130 rounds per gun, essentially a full load of her massive main armament. Additionally, she carried 1,629 rounds for her 6.1-inch guns and 13,500 anti-aircraft rounds. This wasn't just a lot of ammunition. It represented every suitable shell available in Japan at that moment, scrounged from depleted magazines across the home islands. Her secondary batteries carried only 60% of their normal ammunition load. Her anti-aircraft guns had enough for a mere 12 minutes of sustained fire. Captain Kosaku Aruga, her commanding officer, addressed his crew with a sobering finality. "We sail with enough ammunition for one battle. There will be no resupply. Use every round wisely." On April 7th, Yamato faced not just a single attack, but 386 American aircraft, arriving in relentless waves. The first wave of pilots reported target is throwing up tremendous AA fire. By the third wave, pilots observed AA fire noticeably decreased. By the fifth wave, the reports were stark. Target's AA fire sporadic. Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida, one of Yamato's few survivors, described the final moments with chilling clarity. The 25mm guns fell silent first, no ammunition. Then the 100mm guns. Finally, even the main battery had nothing left. We were a 70,000-ton target, nothing more. Meanwhile, the American carriers launching these devastating strikes had been replenished just 72 hours earlier. The USS Essex alone, a single carrier, received 500 tons of ammunition, roughly 400,000 rounds of various calibers. Her air group would expend 200,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition attacking Yamato, knowing with absolute certainty that tomorrow's replenishment would replace every single round. The contrast was a death sentence. The ammunition shortage created cascading, devastating effects throughout Japanese society, extending far beyond the battlefield. By 1944, a critical copper shortage, essential for shell casings, led to nationwide collection drives that confiscated temple bells, some dating back to the 8th century. Bronze statues, including priceless national treasures, were melted down. Household items, from cooking pots to door handles, were requisitioned. Japan melted 45,000 Buddhist temple bells for munitions between 1937 and 1945, representing 90% of all temple bells in the nation. Each bell, weighing hundreds of kilograms and composed of 85% copper and 12 to 15% tin, was especially valuable for its high brass content, ideal for shell casings. 13-year-old Yukio Tanaka recorded in her diary with a child's heartbreaking innocence, "They took our school bell today for ammunition." Teacher Yamamoto cried. He said the bell had rung for 200 years. How many shells will it make? How many seconds will those shells last in battle? The answer, had she known it, was heartbreakingly cruel. A typical temple bell weighing 500 kilograms yielded enough brass for approximately 2,000 small-caliber shell casings. An American destroyer's 40 mount could fire that many rounds in 16 minutes of combat. The sacrifice of centuries of cultural heritage was consumed in mere moments of modern warfare. Worker conditions at Japanese arsenals deteriorated catastrophically. At Toyokawa Naval Arsenal, accident rates reached an alarming 15% monthly by 1945. Exhausted child workers handled dangerous explosives with minimal training, often in dark, poorly ventilated conditions. On August 7, 1945, a B-29 raid destroyed the facility, killing 2,177 workers, mostly teenagers. Contrast this with American worker Mary Roberts, who assembled shells at Hastings. "We worked 8-hour shifts, 5 days a week," she recalled. Good pay, $1.20 an hour. Hot meals in the cafeteria. They showed movies every Friday. We knew we were winning the war, one shell at a time. The human cost of production was as disparate as the production itself. American tactics evolved to ruthlessly exploit their ammunition advantage, while Japanese tactics increasingly reflected desperate conservation. Admiral Willis Ching Lee, the Navy's premier surface warfare tactician, developed the concept of area saturation for night battles. Rather than carefully aimed shots, American ships would simply fill entire zones with shells, making evasion impossible. At the Battle of Surigao Strait, On October 25, 1944, Lee's doctrine reached its terrifying apex. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's battle line fired 285 16-inch shells, 3,104 8-inch shells, and thousands of 6-inch rounds in just 18 minutes. The Japanese battleships Fuso and Yamashiro, sailing with reduced ammunition loads to conserve weight, managed to return less than 100 rounds total before being obliterated. Lieutenant Commander Tokuno Horishi, one of Yamashiro's few survivors, described the experience with chilling words. Shells fell like rain. Not aimed at us specifically, they simply filled the strait with explosions. We fired back into the darkness, but for every shell we sent, 50 came back. Japanese tactics, conversely, became increasingly desperate. A grim progression towards self-destruction. The special attack, kamikaze units represented the logical, horrific end point of an acute ammunition shortage. When conventional weapons become too precious to expend, the weapon becomes the human being himself. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, creator of the Kamikaze Corps, admitted privately, "We resort to body crashing because we lack the ammunition for conventional attack. One pilot, one plane replaces hundreds of shells we don't have." It was a stark admission of industrial bankruptcy, cloaked in spiritual fervor. American codebreakers, through their relentless work, gained invaluable insights into Japan's ammunition crisis, which then profoundly shaped strategic planning. A decoded message from December 1944 revealed the combined fleet's ammunition status. 16-inch, 15% of required minimum. 14-inch, 22% of required minimum. 8-inch, 18% of required minimum. 5-inch, 31% of required minimum. Anti-aircraft. Critical shortage across all calibers. Admiral Chester Nimitz, reading this devastating intelligence, famously remarked to his staff, "They're a boxer with no punch left. We just keep hitting until they fall." American planners then began deliberately planning operations not just to achieve tactical objectives, but specifically to force Japanese ammunition expenditure. Feint attacks, harassment raids, and probing actions were designed, first and foremost, to drain Japanese magazines. Commander Joseph Rochefort, the legendary cryptanalyst, noted, "We could predict Japanese operations by their ammunition requisitions. When they requested resupply, we knew they couldn't fight for at least 2 weeks. We owned the timing of every battle." American submarines further devastated Japanese ammunition transport, creating critical shortages throughout the empire, cutting the lifeline of a nation already struggling. The numbers were staggering. 147 Japanese ammunition ships sunk. Tonnage of ammunition lost, approximately 500,000 tons. Percentage of ammunition shipments lost, 55%. Lieutenant Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton, commanding USS Wahoo, sank the ammunition ship Fukai Maru in the January 1943. The explosion was visible 40 miles away. That single ship carried more ammunition than the entire Rabaul garrison would receive for the next 3 months. Japanese Captain Tatsuoka Shimazaki, commanding an ammunition convoy, described the impossible situation with bitter resignation. "We loaded at Kure with 10,000 tons of shells for Rabaul, 4 ships. By the time we arrived, 2 ships were sunk, 1 damaged. We delivered 2,000 tons. The submarines took the rest." The psychological impact on Japanese logistics officers was crushing, soul-destroying. Commander Yoshiro Tanaka, responsible for ammunition distribution in the Philippines, committed suicide in October 1944 after failing to deliver critical supplies to Leyte. His final note, a desperate cry, "I send empty ships to die. The Americans sink them full or empty. Our guns fall silent while theirs never stop." By war's end, the production statistics told the entire grim story, a testament to two fundamentally different industrial capacities. United States naval ammunition production, 1941 to 1945. Total rounds, all types, 47 billion, 41.4 billion rifled pistol ammunition. Total weight, 4.2 million tons. Peak monthly production, March 1945, 3.5 billion rounds. Number of production facilities, 47. Peak employment, 486,000 workers. Japanese naval ammunition production, 1941 to 1945. Total rounds, all calibers, approximately 15 million, estimated. Total weight, approximately 200,000 tons. Peak monthly production, November 1942, 400,000 rounds. Number of production facilities, 11. Peak employment, 95,000 workers, including conscripted children. The disparity exceeded 3,100 to 1 in small arms ammunition quantity alone. But qualitative differences made the gap even larger, multiplying America's advantage exponentially. American proximity fuses, secretly introduced in 1943, increased anti-aircraft lethality by 300% to 600%. These weren't just simple detonators. They were miniaturized radar units embedded in the nose of the shell, exploding when they detected proximity to an aircraft, eliminating the need for a direct hit. Japanese fuses, degraded by material shortages and inferior manufacturing, suffered a 30% failure rate by 1945. The development program for the proximity fuse cost $1 billion in 1940s dollars, a sum equivalent to 5% of Japan's entire 1944 gross national product. This made it the third most expensive program of the war, after the Manhattan Project, $2 billion, and B-29 development, $3 billion. Its production required precision manufacturing beyond Japanese capabilities. Each fuse contained miniaturized vacuum tubes that could withstand 20,000 times gravity acceleration when fired. By war's end, America had produced 22 million proximity fuses. The proximity fuse first saw combat on January 5, 1943, when the USS Helena shot down a Japanese dive bomber with her second salvo. The technology improved anti-aircraft effectiveness by 300 to 600%, turning skies previously dotted with flak into impenetrable, invisible walls of exploding steel. Admiral Koshi Hagawa, observing proximity-fused shells in action during a 1945 raid, reported with a mix of awe and terror, "The American shells explode by magic, knowing when they approach our aircraft. Each explosion is perfectly placed. This is not warfare. It is witchcraft by mathematics." Fire control systems showed a similar profound disparity. The Mark 37 gunfire control system, standard on American destroyers, incorporated gyroscopic stabilization, automatic radar tracking, mechanical ballistic computation, electric servo drives, and remote power control. This sophisticated system allowed accurate fire in any weather, day or night, at maneuvering targets. The cost per system, $500,000, more than the entire annual ammunition budget for a Japanese destroyer squadron. Japanese fire control remained largely manual, dependent on optical rangefinders, which were utterly useless in poor visibility or at night. Captain Toshiro Miura admitted, with a profound sense of technological inferiority, "We aimed by eye while they aimed by machine. We guessed while they calculated. Every American shell was directed by mathematics we couldn't match." The ammunition disparity produced remarkable survival statistics that defied conventional military wisdom and spoke volumes about the new nature of industrial warfare. The American destroyer USS Lafay survived 22 kamikaze attacks on April 16, 1945, largely because her guns never fell silent. In 80 minutes, Laffey fired 345 rounds of 5-inch, 11,000 rounds of 40 millimeters, and 20,000 rounds of 20 millimeters. Her gunners shot down 9 aircraft definitively and damaged 4 more that crashed elsewhere. Despite taking 4 bomb hits and 6 kamikaze strikes, Laffey survived because her overwhelming defensive fire degraded most attacks before impact, a testament to the power of continuous, heavy barrages. Contrast this with the destroyer Yahagi, sunk while escorting Yamato. Her anti-aircraft ammunition was exhausted after 45 minutes. She could only maneuver helplessly as American aircraft attacked unopposed. 7 torpedo and 12 bomb hits later, she capsized, her guns silent. Her fate sealed not by a lack of courage, but by a lack of metal. The cruiser USS Helena's ammunition expenditure deserves special attention, illustrating the American mindset of abundance. Throughout her career, from December 1941 to July 1943, Helena fired a total of 10,139 rounds, 3,160 rounds of 5-inch and 7,179 rounds of 6-inch ammunition. This wasn't from a single battle, but cumulative across all her engagements, including Pearl Harbor, the brutal Guadalcanal naval battles, and the Battle of Kula Gulf, where she was finally sunk. Helena earned the nickname Machine Gun Cruiser for her rapid-fire tactics. At the naval battle of Guadalcanal on November 13, 1942, she fired so rapidly that Japanese observers thought she was equipped with automatic 6-inch guns, which didn't exist. Her rate of fire exceeded what Japanese doctrine considered physically possible, a feat of sustained firepower born of limitless supply. Captain Hara's observation that Americans fired without thinking while Japanese counted every round captured more than a mere tactical difference. It revealed the war's fundamental nature. This was not a conflict between comparable powers, temporarily advantaged or disadvantaged. This was industrial civilization, fully mobilized, brutally crushing pre-industrial ambition. The final statistics are overwhelming, a definitive declaration of the war's true victor. American ammunition expended, 47 billion rounds total, 41.4 billion rifle, shot, pistol. Japanese ammunition expended, approximately 15 million rounds all types, estimated. Ratio, 3,100 to 1. But even these raw numbers understate the terrifying reality. American forces expended ammunition lavishly in training, in test firing, and in harassment missions designed solely to deplete enemy resources. Japanese forces, by contrast, hoarded rounds until the moment of destruction, each one a precious, irreplaceable commodity. Americans fired to suppress, to intimidate, to dominate. Japanese fired only when certain of effect, their hesitation a deadly tactical handicap. When Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, he spoke of a new and most cruel bomb. But privately, military leaders knew the atomic bomb merely abbreviated a defeat already certain, a fate sealed by industrial might. Admiral Suemu Toyoda, the Navy's final commander, admitted with chilling clarity, "We could build ships without steel. We could fly planes without fuel, but we could not fight without ammunition. The Americans had infinite amounts. We had whatever we could salvage from our grandfathers' temples." In the ruins of the Kure Naval Arsenal, amidst the rubble and desolation, workers found a final production report dated August 14, 1945, the day before surrender. It read, Daily production, 73 shells, various calibers. Worker strength, 423, including 200 middle school students. Status, critical shortage all materials. That same day, thousands of miles away, the Hastings Naval Ammunition Depot reported, daily production, 45,000 shells, various calibers. Worker strength, 5,800. Status, exceeding quota. Recommendation, reduce production due to anticipated war termination. One nation was fighting to the last shell. The other was preparing to scale back because the enemy was broken. The Pacific War's ammunition disparity teaches a lesson that transcends mere military history, a truth that echoes into our modern world. Wars between industrial powers are not decided solely by courage, skill, or determination, though these qualities undoubtedly matter on the individual level. They are decided, fundamentally, by the capacity to transform raw materials into delivered destruction, by the depth of a nation's industrial base. Captain Hara lived to write his memoirs, a rare voice among Japanese destroyer captains who survived the war to reflect. His final assessment was stark, unvarnished. We brought swords to a machine gun fight, then wondered why we lost. The Americans didn't defeat our Navy. Their factories did. Every shell they fired, every continuous barrage announced an industrial supremacy that Japan couldn't imagine, much less match. The brass casings littering the Pacific's floor, stamped with American ordnance marks, each one represents an industrial capacity that transformed warfare from an art of maneuver and individual prowess to a brutal, relentless arithmetic of production. The Americans could afford to fire without thinking because thinking was unnecessary when supply was infinite. Japan counted every round because each one was precious, irreplaceable, a fragment of national treasure transformed into an instrument of war. But wars are not won by counting. They are won by those who can afford not to count, who can fill the sky with steel and the sea with fire, who can transform industrial might into delivered destruction without hesitation or limit. Behind every staggering statistic lay human tragedy, a profound difference in the experience of war. Ensign Teizo Matsui, commanding a 25mm anti-aircraft mount on the carrier Zuikaku, received a mere 10 rounds for his weapon during the Battle of Capengano, the carrier's last desperate fight. He held fire as American planes attacked repeatedly, waiting for the perfect shot that never came, paralyzed by the terrible arithmetic of scarcity. Zuikaku sank beneath him with his unfired rounds still in the magazine. His mother later received his final letter. "I have 10 chances to protect our ship. I will make each one count." She never learned he died without firing a single shot, his courage rendered impotent by the lack of material. Meanwhile, Seaman Robert Dixon, a 20mm gunner on the USS Essex, fired 15,000 rounds during that very same battle. In a letter home, he wrote with youthful exuberance, "Mom, you wouldn't believe how many bullets we shoot. It's like a fireworks show that never ends. Don't worry about me. We've got so much ammunition, nothing can get through." Both young men served their nations with equal courage, equal bravery, but one counted rounds while the other counted victories. The difference was not character, but industrial capacity. Not bravery, but brass casings. Not determination, but the ability to transform national wealth into overwhelming naval firepower. Today, 80 years after Japan's surrender, the lessons of the ammunition disparity resonate with enduring truth. Military professionals study Captain Hara's observation not as a historical curiosity, but as an eternal principle. Wars between industrial powers are decided in factories before they are ever fought in fields. The Pacific War proved that industrial capacity, once mobilized to its fullest extent, generates military power that no amount of tactical brilliance, no degree of national spirit, no measure of individual courage can ultimately overcome. American shells fell like rain because American factories produced like storms. Japanese shells were precious because Japanese factories produced like artisans. In the end, Captain Tamichihara Hara's words stand as an epitaph for an empire that challenged industrial mathematics with spiritual determination. The Americans used shells without thinking while we counted every round. In that profound difference lay not just tactical disadvantage, but strategic impossibility. Not just military defeat, but a civilizational reckoning with the cold, hard arithmetic of modern war. The shells have long since stopped falling. The guns have long since fallen silent. But in naval archives from Pearl Harbor to Yokosuka, in memoirs from Washington to Tokyo, the truth remains etched in the historical record. The Pacific War was decided not by the courage of those who fired the shells, but by the capacity of those who made them. The Americans could afford to fire without thinking. The Japanese could only afford to think without firing. Between those two realities lay the abyss that swallowed an empire's ambitions and forever transformed the world's understanding of industrial warfare. The final testament comes not from admirals or historians, but from the numbers themselves. 47 billion to 15 million. In that ratio lies the Pacific War's true story, not of battles won or lost, but of an industrial colossus that could produce more ammunition than the world had ever seen, facing a nation that melted its temple bells to make a few more shells. The Americans fired without thinking because they could afford to. The Japanese counted every round because they had to. And in that difference, the war's outcome was written long before the first shot was fired.